Aloha, and welcome to Books, 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 where we discuss reading, writing, and everything in between and beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Forsythe, coming to you from Maui on the ThinkTech Network series, broadcasting from our studios in downtown Honolulu. The title of today's episode is Introducing Voices of Hawaii. Joining me today is author Jane Goodsill. Welcome, Jane.
Hi, Rita.
Jane, previously you were on ThinkTech with your Volume 1, Life Stories from the Generation That Shaped the Aloha State. Today, I'm honored to share with our viewers Volume 2, Preserving Island Culture One Story at a Time. Man, researching this book, what did you learn about our island communities?
Oh, my goodness. You'd have to read the book to find out all that I learned. But the first book that came out, I had been doing oral histories somewhere else for a long time. And all of a sudden I thought, what am I doing? Why aren't I taking oral histories in Hawaii? Because this is sort of my passion. So I started learning more about my father's career and the people he knew. And he was a lawyer in Honolulu. And so he knew a lot of people. And so I interviewed people who knew him and people that he mentored and people he worked with. And it was quite an astounding group of people. They're all listed on the back of this copy of Voices of Hawaii, Volume 1. So I didn't know I was going to write a book. That wasn't my plan. But the stories I got were so good, I couldn't keep them to myself. And I thought, of course, oh, everybody knows these stories. But then it turned out nobody knew these stories. And so the publisher thought, yes, let's put them in the book. So we did. And it's been a success. And then as far as I'm concerned, I keep taking these oral histories. I sort of can't stop myself because I sort of fall into meeting another person and wondering what their story is. And then we get to talking. And then I ended up with Volume 2. Which is, it's got a slightly different slant. The first one was subtitle was Life Stories from the Generation That Shaped the Aloha State. And the second one is Preserving Island Culture, One Story at a Time.
Well, one thing you wrote was, and I'll quote you, I could write an entire book about the surprising and delightful ways in which I've ended up collecting oral histories. So my question to you are, what are some of those tricks of the trade of an oral historian?
Oh, when you read that little quote, it began to make me teary. There's something so special about this. Let's see if I can capture it. When I sit down with a person, I don't do any research to find out about them. And I talked to a woman who was a journalist, and she said, what? You don't Google them? You don't find out about them? You don't know anything before you start? I said, no. I don't want to be prejudiced. I want everything they say to be fresh and new. So they can say something that everybody on the planet knows. And Jane Goodsill saying, really? Tell me more. So that makes it very exciting. And of course, as I've learned more, I know more. But that doesn't interfere with the awe that I feel when I'm interacting with people. And how I find people to interact with, that's a story all in itself. I'll be talking to somebody and I may say, oh, well, here's a good example from this book, Volume 2. I talked to Pomai Toledo, who works at Iolani Palace, and her topic was being a pa'u rider. And I wanted to know what the story behind being a pa'u rider is. My gig is not to find out, what day you did this and then what happened, but what's the feeling behind it? What was your experience? What was it like riding on the horse? What was it like getting dressed? And she told me every detail, including riding with her hand out like this for hours on the horse in training. And so in the course of that, she told me that when the pa'u riders get dressed, they wear the pa'u skirt, which covers from the waist down to their boots. And she said, there's this guy who really specializes in wrapping the pa'u skirts with 6 kukui nuts. And I said, oh, I need to talk to him. So I asked if she would connect me, and she did. And a month later, he comes and we do an interview, and I'm going to talk to him only about wrapping pa'u skirts. Well, it turns out he's a kumuhula musician, a writer, and everything. And so had I stayed so focused like I wanted to, I would have missed the story. But instead I went in with wonder and I said, talk to me about anything that comes to your mind. If we got the most wonderful interview, Kimo Kealana, and he shows up several places in volume 2.
Well, you have a real gift, because I know I have the opinion that I wish I would have asked my grandparents more questions, my parents more questions, got them to talk about their history. And, a lot of people say that, I wish I would have. So maybe we should stop wishing and help people to approach their friends and relatives to collect their histories, before it's too late. So what's your opinion on that? Do you have any ideas?
Well, I do. First of all, almost everybody that we know has a cell phone, and every cell phone gets loaded with every Apple cell phone gets loaded with voice memo app. And so it's on all of our phones, and all you got to do is put it up on your screen, and then you press start, and you put it down on the table, and you say, Grandpa, tell me how your family got to Hawaii, and tell me what your grandfather was like, and tell me what kind of work he did, and how did he support himself, and how big a family did he have, and what was his wife's name. And you just ask with wonder all the questions you can think of that have to do making your grandfather be the center of your attention for those few minutes. And that's the magic, Rita. People love to talk about. No, it's not that they want to talk about themselves or be braggadocious. I find very few people are braggadocious, but they're proud. They're proud of their family. They're proud of their contribution, and they're happy to talk about it.
That's beautiful. And, you've captured these voices, and I really enjoy how your voice is quiet while the voices of the storyteller comes through on your pages. And one of my favorite stories was about the 1960s tsunami. Just gave me chicken skin. Will you talk about it a little bit and read from that
I would
passage?
love to.
Oh, thank you.
And here's another story of wonder. The man that I interviewed for this is named Ted Sakai, Theodore Sakai. It turns out he is quite a prominent person. Of course, I don't know that when I go to meet him, but he was the head of the Hawaii prison for many, many years. That's a big job. But we got to talking, and he started telling me about the tsunami, and it was so fascinating that we never even got to his career in the prison system.
Oh.
So that may happen for another interview, or maybe that story has been told. This is part of the magic. I go in thinking one thing and I came out with something totally different. So, and thank you for the comment about my voice being quiet, because that's my goal. I want to be the observer and then the reporter, telling other people's stories. So Ted says, in 1946, when I was born, we lived on the little peninsula of Waiakea. It was an idyllic existence in a neighborhood of many mixed ethnicities. Next door was a Caucasian woman who was my first grade teacher. 2 doors down was a Hawaiian Portuguese family. Across the street was a Hawaiian family with 15 kids. Then there were Japanese families. We played marbles in the park, or we'd just hang around with our bats and balls and wait for whoever would show up to play baseball. Or we'd go to the ocean to fish or swim. We had family chores too. He said, was responsible for making sure the right side of our yard was weeded and cleaned. My older brother did the left side, which I thought was brilliant parenting to get the yard taken care of that way. Now we come to the date of May 23, 1960. On the news, we heard that there was a 9.5 earthquake in Chile and that we might get a tsunami in the afternoon. That night at 12:45 a.m., my mother woke us up. We've got to get out of here. 2 waves had already struck, and the second one came close to our house. I distinctly remember a huge roar like a plane taking off. My mother was trying to muster 6 kids. The youngest, Susan, was 5. Bobby across the street was 1 year older than I. Hey, Ted, there are fish out there. We lived on a dead-end street, and a huge wave had brought fish to the shore. Let's go get some. My mother was screaming frantically, and that stopped me from going with Bobby. We didn't have a car, so we walked, my mom and her 6 kids. A neighbor of ours, Mr. Nakagawa, was evacuating in his pickup truck and stopped for us to pile in the bank. We drove out into thigh-high water with a wall of 8 to 10 feet of water heading down the street toward us. I grabbed Susan and my older brother Ken grabbed Cheryl. As we were wading through the water, the sky lit up. The wave hit the power plant and it exploded. This is in Hilo, right? I think I forgot to mention that. All the electricity to the entire city was cut off and it went totally dark. We waded through the supermarket parking lot to a Quonset hut that served as a warehouse. There was a lean-to building along the Quonset hut, and we climbed up on top. I don't know how we did it, and I don't know how we got down. It was very high. It was pitch black and water was swirling by. No wind, no rain, just water and fear and the exploding power plant. Until finally we saw someone on the ground with a flashlight. It was the owner of the supermarket who came down to check the store. When we got off the roof, Mr. Nakagawa was able to start his truck, which had been in thigh-high water, and drove to his family's home. We spent the night. The next morning, Mr. Nakagawa took Ken to check on our house. I remember Ken came back and just shook his head. He said, "Everything's gone. Everything's gone." And then he said, "Bobby died." Bobby was the boy who wanted me to go get fish with him. His family was in their car waiting for Bobby when the wave hit. It picked up their DeSoto station wagon and floated it in to the Carter's mango tree. And that was where they ended up, and Bobby was stuck under a huge tree fern. We had one of those stilted homes with nothing underneath. It was found 50 to 100 yards away from the foundation, which was gone. The second level of our house was the living area. It floated away, but we were able to salvage it. My dad was back by this time. The father had taken the boat out into the open seas, and they spent the next 2 days in the hot, humid weather dismantling the house board by board. I was amazed by the power of the water. We found the safe from the Isles nightclub on the other side of the peninsula on our property. We also found a truck, probably from the Isles, filled with bottles of beer. Ken turned a bottle upside down, and you could see sand inside of it. There was so much pressure that particles of sand got through completely sealed caps. And the final paragraph is, we basically lost everything we had but the house, which had been moved and they had to rebuild it. We relied on the Red Cross for a lot. Later, I was always generous with my donations to the Red Cross because I understand how important it is to people who really need things. One of my aunties worked at Murokata's department store in Honolulu and sent us a box load of clothes, different sizes for all of us. Another aunt worked at Hadley's Bakery. She sent over a large box of pastries from Honolulu, he said, laughing. We survived, but you can see why that day is embedded in my memory.
What a story. Oh my gosh. I bet you could fill a book with the tsunami stories of people who were either survived it or were, learned from their I know one lady here on Maui whose grandmother was climbing the hill near Hana to get away from it with her children and remembered something that she needed back at the house. So she had the children, they kept climbing, and she went back to get probably the cash that poor lady had saved up. Yeah. And the tsunami washed her out to sea.
Oh.
So yeah, I mean, all of those stories are just chilling.
Yeah. But that brings up an interesting point in my work. I try not to focus on any one topic for too long. I put in a tsunami story, but I don't write a whole book of tsunami stories because I think people may get fatigued. So I just put in enough to whet their appetites.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to another section that I really enjoyed, and it has to do with the bonsai. Oh, my husband spent years in Japan as a teenager, and now he's 76 and has suddenly developed an interest in bonsai even though he knows he's joining a branch of horticulture that needs many years to develop, I think it's wonderful that he has hope to live decades beyond his current age to see his bonsai develop. So can you talk a little bit about that section and read from?
I will. I went to talk to my friend David Yerian, not because I knew what he was going to talk about, but because he lived in a beautiful, beautiful place. He's made a little Shangri-La for himself. I put a little entry before each interview. So I said, I imagine that sitting in David's garden is a little like being in Shangri-La. I soaked it in as he talked about his fascination with plants. Quote, Asians brought the horticultural practices of their homelands with them to Hawaii, bonsai, for example. Whereas the Chinese created potted trees, the Japanese elevated potted plants to an art form, making each one an exact representation in miniature of its original. You know, me, I'm going, really? Tell me more. So this is what he says. In my opinion, bonsai teaches you everything you need to know about plants. Really? Growing bonsai is the highest form of horticulture. You have to keep all the elements in balance: the root, the trunk, the branches, the middle, and the top. You force the tree by clipping and minimizing the top growth so the lower branches get their nutrition. All this while cutting back the roots to keep the system young. A pine tree in Japan can live for hundreds of years in a pot if you take it out every so many years and trim back the roots. You must water them every day. You can't neglect them at all. It's very, very time consuming. A 50-year-old plant grows differently than a 10-year-old plant. There's a lot less vigor in a 50-year-old plant, so you don't want to over-fertilize it. It's like dealing with a young person. You make sure they get good nutrition and they eat a lot. In a nursing home, they don't eat that much. It's the same thing with plants.
How true. I'm thinking about myself. It's like, yeah, I don't need that much, but oh, that's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
So let's move on. I got to confess something. I had to look up a word in your book that I didn't know. I didn't know the word luthiers. Am I the only one who didn't know that word?
No,
So
I have
would
heard
you
that from a
talk
lot
about-
of people.
Okay.
And a lot of people have used it as a trick question. They'd say to their spouse, okay, what's a luthier? And they're supposed to come up with the answer when the person's reading the book and knows it. So yeah, it's a formal word. Do you want to tell us what it means? Or do you want me to tell?
Go ahead. I was hoping you would just take it away.
Yes. A luthier is a person who makes stringed instruments. And the instruments that we're talking about in this book are guitars, ukuleles, and lutes. And oddly enough, I interviewed 3 luthiers. 3. I've never interviewed 3 people who talked about the same topic. Like I told earlier, I don't do that. But these people I was told to do this by people I trusted. And when a door opens, I walk through. And the door to these people opened. So here's what happened. The first person was Bart Potter. Did you know that when you make a stringed instrument, you have to start with wood? And you have to get very special wood from very special trees and have it treated and cut in a very special way so that it can carry the tone of the quality that you want in your instrument. So it starts with the wood. So Bart is the guy who cuts down the trees and mills them and then makes them into very, very thin slices. They're called veneers. And then you make them so they open up like that, which is called book matched. And you notice on the back of a guitar or ukulele, you have this side and a little line that goes through and this side, and they match. That's what Bart Potter does. So I thought, wow, who knew that? That was fascinating. And then I went over to the Big Island and I interviewed a guy named David Gomes. And I knew Gomes because his brother, my brother, went to school with him at HPA. So I'm going to just read you this introduction to David Gomes because it tickles my fancy. I was way over my head talking to a guitar and ukulele maker about how he creates his instruments. I kept reminding myself that I ask about the final product as a way to uncover the passion that drives the creation. That's what I'm all about, the passion. Why do you do this? What's in it? How does it happen? So Dave Gomes is a man who lets his creations speak for themselves. This did not make him an ideal candidate for an oral history, but we were both game. Nearly the whole time we were talking, he had a guitar in his arms, and from time to time, he'd play a bit instead of talking. It was a very special day, but I came out of there thinking, I don't think I can use anything of that. And instead, I got this wonderful story he tells about how he learned to make guitars. So that was the second person. That's the person who makes the guitars and the ukuleles. And then the third person I interviewed, I thought, well, what more could I learn about this? Well, okay. Wait, I have two more things to say about Dave Gomes. First of all, at one point I said, David, after you've made the whole guitar and gone through the whole process, which he describes in the book, I said, what happens if it doesn't sound good? Long pause. He said, that never happens. Wow. So he's pretty much a master.
Okay. Confident.
Well, no, he's not braggadocious at all. He was just stating a fact, which I loved. I thought that was wonderful. So here's a man named Kylan Reese. His name is spelled K-I-L-I-N, rhymes with smiling. And he's from the mainland, but he came over here and started working in a luthier shop repairing instruments. And from doing that, he kept meeting people. And so this is the story that unfolded. The Martin Dreadnought guitar is the most famous acoustic guitar in the world, played by Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Gabby Pahanui, Paul McCartney, and many others. I was surprised when I started hearing little snippets about this guitar having Hawaiian origins. I got in touch with the Martin Guitar Company, the oldest stringed instrument manufacturer in America, founded in 1833. I met Chris Martin IV, the sixth generation owner of the company, and expressed my interest in learning about Hawaiian connections to the Martin Guitar Company. He said, we have 3 centuries of Martin guitar history in our archives, and we will make them available for you to do your research. I dug through boxes and boxes of manuscripts, finding all the correspondence related to the design of a guitar made specifically for a Hawaiian man named Mekia Kealakai. In 1915. Can you believe it, Rita? 1915. A dramatic story began to emerge, a story which placed Hawaii at the epicenter of innovation and design in American and music history. In those archives, I found the original templates and jigs used to make this guitar. It was incredible to hold them in my hands. This acoustic jumbo guitar, designed specifically for Mekia Kealakai, became the famous Dreadnought. And I have a picture at the beginning. This is not Kealakai, but this is a picture of a Dreadnought guitar. Hold on a minute. You see how big and fat and round it is? So he found that was made specifically for this Hawaiian man in 1915 by Martin Guitar. So then the story continues, and Kylan gets so interested in this. He said, music is a profound way to look at history. I see stringed instruments as a manifestation of a collaboration by people and cultures across every boundary and border, all united in this pursuit of a more perfect musical voice. In 2019, we founded the Kealakai Center for Pacific Strings, a nonprofit dedicated to the research, restoration, and celebration of this great Pacific string story. And this is the final sentence. The Pacific String Museum will not have the burden of being a brick and mortar building, which means it's going to be a digital. We can all go to it anytime. Instead, we will partner with all of Hawaii's leading cultural and historical institutions to share the telling of a local story that the world is waiting to hear.
Beautiful. Well, we're getting close to our ending time, so I want to be sure that we include one of my favorite stories from Ty Lake, who created a chair for the Dalai Lama. I just cannot hardly believe it. I'm so excited about it. So in a couple of minutes, can you read a little bit about that?
I can. And of course, I meet with Ty and have no idea what he does. And one day a man came to his shop and liked what he did and said, would you be interested in building a chair for the Dalai Lama? And Ty, who's kind of a spiritual guy and a beautiful artisan, said, yes. And so what parameters was he given for building this chair? 1, they said the Dalai Lama likes to sit cross-legged. 2, he likes a place to put his tea. And from that, Ty had to make a chair. So Ty said, what was important to me, he said, 1, that it be locally made completely of products from Holualoa, Hawaii. That the chair disappear behind the Dalai Lama so as not to distract from his presence. That every surface be curved slightly so as not to reflect photographic flashes. And that the chair hold his presence even when he was not in it. And he did create a chair, and I doubt you can see it very well in this picture, but it's in the book and it's online. Ty Lake, Chair for the Dalai Lama.
That's just incredible. Oh, your stories are so wonderful, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. And so thank you so much for being our guest on our show. I also want to thank our broadcast engineer who's worked so hard to put this on for us, our floor manager, and Jay Fidell, our executive producer. A special mahalo to our underwriters. And thank you for joining us and tuning in to Books, Books, Books. Remember to read, write, and create your world.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.